Bottom of the Smash Mountain, Season 2, Episode 36, Quietly Hype. Welcome to the podcast. My name is Jesse. You can also call me Cypher. You get it. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode here. Today we have Juggleguy AKA Robin Harn. You know who this person is. It's pretty much obvious why you're here. You're here to listen to the interview. But before we do that, I guess I should say for the record that Robin is the head tournament organizer of the Big House series. No, not a big deal. I'm thankful to talk to a variety of different people in regards to Melee and on this podcast. But yes, I am very thankful that I was able to have this great conversation with Robin, who was very gracious with his time, and we were able to talk about a variety of different things, and including the cease and desist situation. So sit back, relax. Hope you enjoy the interview, and we'll talk afterwards. Here we are, bottom of the Smash Mountain, and today I'm very excited to be joined by Juggleguy AKA Robin Harn, your favorite TO's favorite TO. Robin, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. You're too kind. Good to be here. Good to meet you, Jesse.
It's been really cool to be able to talk to different TOs, and in the course of those conversations, I feel like your name does come up a fair amount. Most recently, I was able to have Kish Prime on for an interview, and when we were done talking, just sort of going over like one tournament in particular, and I think this would be a great way to segue into some of your origin story as it comes to Melee and doing tournaments and running events. Something that Kish Prime said was how excited he was to have you on the team for FC Legacy, which was a tournament all the way back in 2012, almost
Love
10 years
tournament.
ago.
Yep, I did listen to that interview, actually, just a couple of days ago. That was really good. I don't know if somebody was supplying you notes or if you're just a god at remembering everything that happened in like 2005 onwards, but you had some pretty good questions for Kish, so that was kind of impressive.
I did have a lot of help from Patty from Also Melee, so shout outs to Patty. Definitely gave me some
Oh, that's
notes
right.
there.
You mentioned that. Yep.
So I think that's one way to go in terms of your origin story. But by 2012, you had already started the Big House and you were going into the Big House 2 back in 2012. Also, I wanted to go back just a little bit further first and hear when you first got into Melee. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I don't know if this was on the Kish Prime episode or the Matt Duds episode, but I was listening, and I think, if I remember correctly, I think we might actually have the same piece of Melee content to thank for our introduction to the competitive scene. And that would be Ken vs. PC Chris for me at MLG New York.
Yes.
Is that how you kind of got introduced to?
Yes, that was the first competitive Melee set that I remember watching on YouTube, like all the way back in like 2006 or so. Then that was incredible.
Honestly, just does not get old. I mean, it's one of the greatest commentary intros of all time, honestly. But like, I basically have it memorized. Wife just hops on the mic. He's like, he lays it all out there in 30 seconds. Oh, piece of Chris, rising young star. 6 months ago, only semi-respected. A year ago, barely known. 2 years ago, not known at all. And here he is in grand finals, threatening to beat Ken. It's so exciting. I could recite basically the rest of the set. That kind of content is, I hope that is still a thing for this current generation of players, because I can point to that very clearly and be like, that's when I first learned of competitive Melee.
I have Wife to thank for a lot of the original sets that I've watched of competitive Melee, and Wife did such a great job, and the other commentators as well. I love how Alston Melee did a tweet, maybe it was about a month ago or so, to say that Wife was really pulling that commentating block so hard, and husband was going, yeah, Martha, humanoid character with a big sword.
Yeah, he's a humanoid, and he has a big sword, and there's a forward cancel, and we're sitting here in 2020 and we're like, what is a forward cancel, husband?
But it wasn't always like super perfect. But I think that when Wife was involved with commentary way back when, in the MLG days in particular, that was really fun to hear those sets, even though I still didn't really understand what was happening. I didn't know what tech was when Ken would try to up B and then PC Chris would down smash on Dreamland and like down smash over and over, and Ken would just keep teching off of the wall.
Yes.
And, like, having that explained, like, it was really cool.
That was a mind-blowing moment for me too. I was like, and by the way, these videos on YouTube are like at like 144p or something, so it's kind of hard to tell what Ken is doing. But now we know that okay, he was doing a tech against the wall to against PC Chris's down smashes. But yeah, back in the day, I was like, oh my god, he did this thing, this magical thing, like 3 straight times. Yeah, best player in the world.
Absolutely. Like, I was like, no, that doesn't make sense. He's supposed to fly away from the stage. Why does he keep on like making contact with the wall? What's going on?
Exactly.
It's really cool.
So yeah, I mean that's how I learned of the existence of competitive melee. So I started playing a bit here and there. I mean, I played casually like everybody else, but like when I started getting into like the Ken vs PC Chris's on YouTube, I then just started playing more. There was a Smash Club at my high school started by a guy named Lane, who most people might know as one of the best Ice Climbers players back in the early Brawl days. So Lane got me into Melee. I was kind of a Brawl baby in that sense, in that I did not go to any tournaments until after Brawl came out. And for a while, I played both because, I mean, luckily it seemed like everywhere you went, the like the Melee boomers at the time were clinging on to their game, begging TOs to include Melee as a side event to the big Brawl tournament happening at the time, which is pretty funny looking back on it. So I remember traveling to a Chicago tournament with both Melee and Brawl at it, and I enter both, and I basically convert back to a Melee diehard right then and there because of the warm welcome I got from the Chicagoland Melee scene. So at that point, it kind of became less about the gameplay and more who are the people surrounding the events that I associate with and who do I vibe with. So I still very clearly remember Kells, Big D, Scythe, Rat, some of these Chicago homies. I'd mostly have them to thank for helping me see the light and getting me back into Melee on that one trip to Chicago.
It's really cool to hear how it was a blend of the game and the community itself that really sold you on Melee and gently led you away from Brawl. A great choice on your part, of course, but also big kudos to the game of Melee itself and the community, it sounds like, as well.
Yeah, it's, I mean, no shit at Brawl. I mean, it's this thing where we had Smash 64 to Melee transition, and almost universally everyone's like, Melee's just better. So when Brawl came out, there was kind of this underlying assumption that it should be better, right? Right? Like, they would make a worse game, would they? And then finally, after a year, everyone was like, man, they really made a worse game. I guess we're going back.
And with Brawl, there was so many Nintendo Wiis being sold, so many, and that would just bring in people who got Brawl and played it and thought, oh, I'm really good at this game, and it would bring people to Brawl tournaments. But like you were saying, people would talk about how there would be like so many setups for Brawl, all these Wiis everywhere, but then there'd be one setup, someone brought their GameCube or just at least brought the disc and memory card and it's like, no, we're not playing Brawl in this setup, we're playing Melee. And that's how it survived in a local sense, that there were still a small amount of people here and there across the United States and across the rest of the world who just insisted, no, Melee is still a great game, there's still more to be played, like all those great quotes and bringing Melee through the dark ages of Melee, which lasted longer than a year. It was a long time until it really started to blow up, but that didn't stop you from trying to host your own tournament series. Was Big House the first real attempt at doing it yourself, or did you try to do other things before leading up to the Big House?
There was a progression. I didn't just jump into Big House. I hosted a couple Little House tournaments, just in the teens attendance wise, and then there was a kind of a jump from there to we did inter-campus monthlies between the University of Michigan and Michigan State University, where every month we would alternate back and forth to try to catalyze the scenes in both areas at once, which worked out pretty well. I think that was back in like 2010. 2011, and that kind of led to a little bit of recognition from the national TOs. Apex reached out to me, and they were doing this like Road to Apex circuit qualifier thing, where they wanted one big tournament in each region to give qualifier points to the winner or whatever. Winner would be flown out to Apex 2012, I believe, was the deal. So, I was contacted and asked to do the Midwest edition of the Road to Apex, and that's how the Big House was born.
And where does the name The Big House come from? I think I was hearing in an interview that Homemade Waffles, a friend of the program, by the way, who you were talking to about the origin of the name. Is there a venue in Michigan that already goes by The Big House?
You've done your research. Very nice. It's the Big House is the name of Michigan Stadium in Ann Arbor, which is, I believe, still the largest football stadium in North America, if I recall correctly. And there's really not too much of an interesting story behind this. I didn't know what to call this Road to Apex Midwest event, and I was like, I wasn't thinking there was going to be a sequel to this. I was like, we'll just call it something that definitely rolls off the tongue and stands the test of time, which is the Big House, because it's been around for 100 years.
Wow, the football stadium itself has been around for a very long time. You're making it sound like if it really is the biggest one in North America, then it probably has to seat at least like 120,000 people. Wouldn't that be crazy to have for Melee? And this is something that I'm sure you've thought about, because it sounds like you're Michigan through and through.
Wouldn't that be nice? I have thought about this. And there are a couple logistical difficulties, namely that I usually host in October in the middle of the football season. And the fact that Michigan Stadium, last I checked, does not have a roof. So those poor CRT TVs, God forbid there's rain in the forecast.
But I also wanted to ask you about being from the Midwest and being from Michigan. It sounds like for most or all of your life, what about the Midwest is something that you really like to sell on for other people who haven't been out, who are interested in checking out tournaments in the Midwest? Like, how would you talk about that if I'm literally asking you, so you can just answer that question then.
Yeah, I think there's a culture surrounding the Midwest. At least there was before the age of, social media, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube. I think it was a little bit easier to kind of categorize the different regions as having distinct cultures. And for me, what jumped out at me with the Midwest is we didn't have the best players. So the TOs from this region, we had to really step up our game and make sure the events were of high quality to convince people to fly out. And it is a good meeting point between East Coast and West Coast too. So, I mean, I didn't mind playing like kind of the third wheel. East Coast and West Coast had the best players, and Midwest was kind of like, hey, just come to our region and duke it out here. We'll host a really good event for you. That's what we're going to contribute. We don't have the good players, but come anyway. And that it was kind of like that for a while. That was kind of the story behind Big House 1. S2J and Lovage came out from the West Coast, I believe, for the first time. And back then, Toronto was such a powerhouse. We had Kirby Kaze, Unknown, and Raynex come out from, I guess I'm counting Toronto as East Coast, but that was essentially the concept.
And in order to be able to qualify for Apex 2012, that's really cool. And so after the Big House happens, like you've already had a lot of tournaments that you've run underneath your belt, and you weren't necessarily thinking about the Big House 2 or anything like that, but I was kind of curious of how you came to be involved with FC Legacy and memories that you have from that event in 2012.
Yeah, great question. This is taking me back. Melee, I don't. Was it Melee Legacy, or I remember it as Melee FC 10 Reunion? Are we talking about the same tournament?
This is the tournament that was in the original Smash Brothers documentary, where
okay, yeah,
Mango
and Hungry
being
Bucks
slightly problematic, you could say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is the same tournament. I guess the Kishes, they just can't make up their minds on what to call the tournament. But we are talking about the same thing. Back then, I was big on recording matches. You look back at like the treasure trove of Melee sets from like Homemade Waffles' channel, and I was kind of one of the other people making sure that important matches from the Apexes and the Big Houses of that era were recorded. And there's just something about preserving those. Some of those matchups were really novel, like S2J versus Kirby Kaze. You couldn't even think it was possible a year before the Big House 1. So I reached out to Kish and I was like, hey, it's really important that, especially in the format that you're doing with a lot of round robins, there's going to be a lot of matches here that are going to go unrecorded, and I can boost that number and just post-mortem after the event get you more exposure and just help grow the scene that way. And Kish was like, yeah, absolutely, that's a fantastic idea. You are in charge of whatever the stream queue, bracket queue, recording queue, whatever you want to call it at the event. And that's kind of how I helped.
Something that Kish Prime said, like, made it very clear to me, like, how proud he was of the team that really helped to make that event go super well, and was really proud of like how the event turned out and everything, even if even if it didn't like come across as like a super awesome event in the documentary itself. Like, everybody that was there seemed to have a great time, and Kish Prime seemed to be very proud of it overall.
I loved it because the Kishes, they are not afraid of stamping their personality on what their creative vision for the event is. I don't know if you know this, but I believe that event was like from a Sunday to a Tuesday or some crazy schedule. And everyone still went anyway. So, and the round robin at the end, I don't think that's really been done ever again. But essentially, instead of a top 8 double elimination bracket, they put the final 8 competitors in a giant round robin and just played it out. Everybody got 7 matches versus the other opponents, and somehow they scheduled it in a way. I mean, maybe this was a little bit lucky that Mango and Hungrybox were leaps and bounds above everybody else, but Mango and Hungrybox were the last 2 to play in that round robin, and that kind of acted as a pseudo grand finals.
I did not know this, and I was always confused when I watched the documentary how the commentators were saying, wow, they really knew what they were doing by having Mango and Hungrybox play last year in the lineup. And I'm sure if Mango and Hungrybox were sort of like the favorites to take that event, that having them play last would make sense to do that, as compared to playing in the middle or playing at the start of all of that round robin as a top 8. That is interesting.
Yeah, exactly. I thought it was a wonderful format. Maybe they caught lightning in a bottle with that specific event, but it led to a lot of good content on YouTube for people.
And something that you said also in the Big House 7 interview, where Homemade Waffles and you're both sitting down at the end of the event. I really enjoyed the fact that there were a few of those still up on YouTube, that you were interviewing with either Scar or somebody else at the end of the Big House, whatever number it is, and just kind of like looking back as it's wrapping up. Something that you said that I thought was interesting is how a head TO should really have a wide variety skill base, as compared to being good at one really important thing, but to be skilled or medium-sized good at a bunch of different things, and being able to find people that can do specific jobs and tasks better than the head TO can ever do, like assembling a true team. And that's something that is a really big deal for you, where you can even get to the point where you could play friendlies at your own tournament, even during the days that the tournament itself is actually happening. How important is that for you? When did you first decide that's how you want to run a tournament?
Yeah, it's really about recognizing the strengths of your personnel, right? So what I will say about that is when organizing a staff around me for an event or whatever organization I'm part of, usually the recurring theme is everyone around me, every team member I work with, and every contractor I hire is usually way better at their job than I would be if I were to do their job. And like, I have a broad range of interests. I like putting on different hats. Part of that means maybe I understand more about different departments. But at the end of the day, do I really understand? Like, no, not really. I don't know the nitty gritty details of like the technical stuff that a stream producer has to come up with. And like at my job, I don't know what happens inside a computer when it compiles my code, but I know just enough to have an intuition on how to put certain projects together. So I feel like TOing is the art of knowing just enough about the most possible things, and just try to do that in a way that builds the community with your creative vision.
And when did you figure out that the Big House 2 was going to happen, and then leads into Big House 3, and you start to say to yourself, we're too big for the venue we're in now? Sort of like the growing pains and lessons that you learned as you continue to build into, we're doing the 4th one now, like all that kind of stuff, if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think having not hosted anything on a major scale before, Big House 1 kind of scratched my entrepreneurial itch. I really enjoyed the process of finding a venue and, like I said, putting on a lot of different hats, whether that's marketing, logistics, the technical stuff. So that's kind of why I wanted to do Big House 2 and 3, and it moved to a 2-day event, and then finally like a 3-day event a couple of years later. And like just the support from the top players in the community was what helped drive that. I think for 2, Mango and Hungrybox came out, and that was the moment where I was like, oh wow, we have a couple of the gods actually coming to my events. I think we gotta do this again. And it feels good to be able to have the challenge entrepreneurially to be like, how do we deal with a 300 person event or 400 or 500? We can't just keep doing getting together this ragtag group of Michigan homies, just like 5 or 6 guys trying to host this thing. And I think that's we got away with it for a while, but Big House 4 was probably the stopping point there.
Where it gets to the point where, like, when I was able to talk to G-Town, Tom, based in New England, being like, yeah, when Juggleguy says to me, you're coming out to help with the big house, then I'm going out to help with the big house. So, like, it's like cool stuff like that where you're able to use the friends that you've made along the way and people that you've been able to network with to say, hey, when we do this again next year, I'd like for you to be involved in some way because I see what you're doing in your community specifically. Like if it's out in West Coast or East Coast, I see what you're doing, and it would be great if you could help in some capacity for the next big house. Like I think that you possess that ability to be able to see that in people and then put them in a place where they can succeed when you bring them in. And preparation seems to be really important to you as well. It's something that you've talked about before where you say nobody should get to my event on Thursday to help with any sort of thing, whether that's literally moving around chairs and CRTs or doing stuff with stream, production, whatever it is. They shouldn't arrive not knowing what to do. If you wanted to talk about that a little bit.
A lot of the work that goes into like a large scale event can be front loaded. That's absolutely right. So I remember there's a piece of advice somebody gave about, oh, what do I do when I get stuck in Jigglypuff's wall of pain back airs? And some top player responded, don't be there. don't be in that situation in the first place. And I feel like that is very analogous to some of the TOing challenges. Is you don't want to be the one putting out the fires. Even if you're really good at doing that, it's preventing the fires from happening in the first place. And that is a philosophy I try to carry out and embody in the Big House series. And it's worked out okay, minus, like I said, Big House 4, that was, honestly, like people remember the top 8, which was amazing, but that was by far the worst tournament I've ever run. And most people don't know that.
What would you say stands out in your memory of running that event now that you feel like, oh, I've definitely learned from that. This is how the Big House 5 was better in that way? Or do you not like to talk about like the negative kind of stuff about running tournaments for yourself?
Oh, I'm all about talking about the negative stuff. That's how we learn. But essentially, we were dealing with huge growth at the time from just going back the ripple of new players coming in after the documentary and Evo bringing us back, which both happened in 2013. So Big House 4 was in 2014, and we felt those effects for the first time. And maybe in hindsight, I should have prepared more for the giant turnout, because the first 3 big houses, the attendance, I believe, was like 100, 120, 170. And then all of a sudden, 570 at Big House 4. So,
whoa.
Yeah, like a 300 and something % growth in 1 year. I don't know if any other Smash event series has experienced that kind of jump, but you can just ask some of the Michigan homies like Brian, Chad, CTL, Richard, Roki. We were trying desperately to keep up during the event, and while also looking at each other being like, why the hell did we not anticipate this? So in my eyes, that was basically the last do it with your own ragtag crew of homies Smash Major that has ever existed. And from that point on, we had to learn about just like economies of scale and all this all this stuff that, you know, enters Gaming Gen and Smash GG. Those were the 2 heavy hitters that really helped us for the Big House 5 and beyond.
So throughout this whole process, when it's Big House 4 and Big House 5, the Big House 6, what are you doing in your own personal life? Because it's like you probably say to yourself, I could like maybe run other tournaments. Maybe you did. Maybe you still do. I'm curious to hear about that. But what else were you doing like in between like one really large weekend of your life a year, the rest of the way through, like college, that sort of thing, all that stuff?
Yeah, college, man. I graduated in 2013, and ironically, I think, you know, after that, I got into what I think I was working IT at a healthcare company for a number of years. So, just getting into the routine of a 9 to 5 office style job, it might have helped me just like categorize my time between, okay, this is when I'm working on Big House and this is when I'm at my day job. Whereas in college, it was more of a scramble, like uh, not really knowing where my mind is wandering at any given moment. So uh, the thing is with those events that are getting like thousands of people, it is a pretty long preparation process. So I usually start thinking about it in like February and March for an October event, which, I mean, in other industries, you have to get venues years ahead of time, but in Smash, we famously are last minute for everything. So last minute in this case is honestly like 8 or 9 months.
So you're able to go from different size venue to different size venue because obviously the Big House 1 is a different place than the Big House 9. But
Yeah.
when you're now experiencing all the growth and you have started to increase the size of the team, and now we're starting to get into like the 2017 era, like Big House 7 and the Big House 8, do you
Mhm.
feel like this is pretty much a self-sustaining thing where you go, this is about the only tournament that I'm going to run, I'm not going to try to do anything else?
Not quite that extreme. I would say I was still hosting some of those intercampus monthlies, but that's like January through April, right? So a pretty good time of year where I'm focusing my creative effort on something else, and then it's transitioning into like, okay, we'll start thinking about Big House and see what other tournaments are doing. Try to incorporate the ideas that we've learned in the past year. I think it's pretty funny the cycle of you know I would often just like I would go to Evo, I'd go to SmashCon in like 2015, 2016, and these were very different events, very cool in their own ways, and they have their own personality. And a lot of times I would just copy what they did every year, and until I copied it enough that I learned why that was actually good for the events attendees. And Sheridan has kind of echoed the same thing. And the biggest compliment he ever gave me was, "Hey, Robin, I copied some of the stuff you did at Big House, and you'll see in a couple months at Genesis." So that's kind of the cycle of thinking about the tournaments and developing the vision for it.
So what about Juggle Guy the player? I feel so bad for you because when I looked up Juggle Guy and was looking for a melee
Oh no!
set that you played in, the first thing that came up was
Oh
you
no!
versus Mewtwo King, and you're playing as Fox, and I'm sure you know about this.
Oh God, that's so. I'll try to give the abbreviated version. Everyone has a Mewtwo King story. Back when he came to Ann Arbor Ann Arbor had some really big brawl tournaments, and he would also play melee on the side just to farm us for money. So after the tournament, I was like, okay, well, I'm the TO, so why don't here play me in a couple sets first. I'll keep this the payout in my pocket here. We'll have you do this first. And he was like, all right, fine. And for some reason, he didn't want to do the Marth Falcon matchup. So I said, okay, well, I'll play your game. Who do you want me to play? And he said Fox, and I was like, oh shit, I know how this is gonna go. But me being a recording fiend at the time, I was also thinking, hey, you know what? This could grow my YouTube channel. I bet this is gonna be a banger. Everybody commenting, and I don't mind being the whipping boy here. He'll four stock me like 7 straight times. That's fine.
And it actually did turn out that way. That video has done well, especially since again this is coming out during a time when there wasn't a ton of Melee content, certainly not at the level that it is nowadays.
Mhm.
So congratulations on that. But what I did get really excited and popped off a little bit observing today was you playing against the Crimson Blur, Prime Crimson Blur, and
Oh.
yes, you get to play Captain Falcon this time. Mango and
Love that.
Scar are commentating, and no player cams, right?
Oh yeah, there's this whole story. Like I was pretty anal about how the stream layout looked. Once upon a time, I was like, you know what, I'm not feeling the player cams. So there's this whole we didn't really have a good line of communication on Twitter and whatnot back. This was 2014, so the whole running joke became like, oh, Blur versus Juggleguy. This is further right for player cams to be on the stream. And that's a ooh. I could talk hours and hours about Blur. That the guy has done so much for Melee and also been the butt of so many jokes. It's fantastic.
One of the best characters, but I feel like I hardly know Blur in terms of like a more of a human person, other than when things seem to be in a bad spot for Melee, Blur comes out. Blur is in everybody's chat trying to push for, hey, we got to rally around Melee or rally around whatever the situation is. Like I remember especially, and I am getting a little ahead of myself, but just as an example, with the cease and desist letter from Nintendo for the Big House 10 online, like Blur was out there, like, you know, fighting the good fight. So if you want to share a story that you feel like kind of explains who Blur is more as a person and not so much as the character that I feel like I know him more of, that would be really cool if you don't mind sharing.
Oh, it's gonna kill me to have to compliment Blur, but he is the first person I called right after I got news of the cease and desist. I didn't know who else was more qualified to give me advice at that time, because he worked at Twitch for a number of years trying to make something happen with Nintendo, and learned firsthand how difficult that is. So it was. I'm trying to take myself back to 2020 when this happened. I think I was moping around in the summer like any other TO whose late 2020 event got canceled due to COVID. But suddenly I'm like, okay, well, Slippy is this breakthrough we need. Let's host an online bake house. And then I get an email from a contact at Nintendo of America, like the competitive play department, and I guess for privacy reasons, we'll just call him Mr. Ninja, Mr. Nintendo Ninja. Because
sure,
Mr. Nintendo Ninja, he tells me to hop on a call later that week, and he very clearly lays out the fact that Nintendo's not happy with Slippy circulating through the Melee scene, especially at an upcoming event that, like mine, has been historically quote unquote partnered with Nintendo in the public eye. So I mean that was the most direct stance I've heard from them, but at this point, it's kind of like TOs are thinking in the back of their minds, they haven't really shut down an event since EVO 2013, and they didn't even succeed at that. So what's going to happen if we just say no to them when they come calling, right? What's the worst that could happen? And I that's exactly what I did. And literally less than 3 weeks later, they sent me a cease and desist letter from some lawyer in California. So that is very unfortunate, because I keep thinking about, wow, they took action so fast, and if they just put the same amount of enthusiasm into actually helping the scene rather than shutting down an event in 3 weeks, imagine the possibilities.
I certainly have seen like the discourse around the cease and desist time, like of how this has been going on for years. Like Nintendo has more or less been trying to screw over Melee and screw over Smash, and then we kind of hear testimonies from other communities as well that are Nintendo communities saying, yeah, haven't really felt a whole lot of support from Nintendo either, that kind of thing. But just to take a step back, in 2015 or so is when certain like Apex 2015 perhaps, or at least the Genesis that was hosted that year, that Nintendo partnership, like when that's first started to get thrown around, like, hey, Nintendo is actually reaching out and partnering up with like the big tournaments, not with EVO, but like with Genesis, and then later on for you, the Big House, and I guess SmashCon, I'm guessing, or trying to remember being one of those events as well. But regardless of the list, from your experience, what was that like in those times when there was a bit of a buzz around the idea of Nintendo might be warming up to us, but my impression is that they tried deliberately to kind of keep things on like the down low and try to offer as little direction as possible in what I feel is kind of a deliberate stance of saying, let's not give these tournament organizers and this entire community like something that they can actually grasp at. Try to more or less be steam and air, something that you can't really find borders and rules or yeses and nos. It's just all really confusing. That's what it seems to me.
It is confusing, and honestly, it looks silly in hindsight. But at the time, I would challenge people to try to put themselves in our shoes and the TOs rather, because there was tremendous upside that we saw, and honestly, some sacrifices had to be made. But the whole concept is, okay, why does Nintendo care about shutting down an event like Big House Online? So what I've observed is at some point in the growth of an organization or event or whatever, they have to start playing by the rules laid out by the governing body that exists in that realm. So a mom and pop shop can get away with paying employees under the table, dodging taxes or whatever. But bigger companies, they're too visible. They can't really avoid the attention of the IRS. And then we have the biggest organizations, Genesis, Evo, Big House, which I don't know. It's like the Google, Apple, Amazon of the Smash landscape, I suppose, because we're on a whole nother level of attention. Nintendo knows that their intellectual property is being represented to millions and millions of viewers, and so they consciously decide to step in and exert their control over certain areas of the production. So like the big thing I want to clarify is we don't choose to be partnered with Nintendo. It's them. They come calling, and they offer their licensing agreement to us, which it kind of assures the TO that an EVO 2013 situation won't happen again with our event. So each individual TO has a different risk profile, and I mean, most of us, we just go with it, because sure, one of us could decline the license agreement, but that's asking us to take on the risk of having the event scrutinized, potentially shut down. So I think there was an attitude that Nintendo would never do that after EVO 2013. We just decline and do our own thing. But I guess the cease and desist last year probably swings that back in the direction where we're risk averse again. So
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I was just gonna say I definitely fall in that camp, and that's what I would love for the average community member to understand and empathize when they ask, why can't Genesis or Big House just run Project M, or why can't you guys mass import a bunch of modded Wiis and load up UCF everywhere, just publicly. It's just not that simple at our level of engagement with the parent company, unfortunately.
One of the greatest double-edged swords that I can think of within Melee, other than a character like Fox that can destroy as well as be destroyed when it comes to the community side of things and tournament organization, is how you can have different people, different smaller organizations. There's the VGBCs of the world, and then there's stuff like Beyond the Smash or Beyond the Summit, like trying to organize their events. There's different people trying to run their own tournaments, and they sort of operate independently of one another, but that also means that there's not a governing body, quote unquote, of Smash. Even something like the Code of Conduct panel, which I thought was awesome, like there's just less of that in Melee. It's like one of the greater double-edged swords. I wondered what your thoughts were on or are on the fact that it's not like there's one big sort of like Melee group, kind of like how Melee Ami operated in that sense for a little while, not for tournament organizations specifically, but for a little while was sort of like the rallying cry for the community. But there's kind of less of that, I feel like, in Melee than there ought to be. But what are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a double-edged sword. At the same time, one of the reasons we're so strong as a community is because of the lack of Nintendo involvement for so long, and we were able to develop as a grassroots scene and have that foundation behind us. On the other hand, that comes with a lot of downsides, like the lack of prize money and the fact that anytime a big organization is thinking about sponsoring an event, the first question that the upper management at that company's going to ask is this Nintendo approved? And there is just simply no clear answer to that question ever. So, yeah, I mean, it's kind of a shadowy governing body that only steps in when they feel like their IP is being represented in a way that they don't like, which it's a little unfortunate, but I don't think we've heard the last from them too. So it's something that we just kind of have to contend with.
An event that happened recently that I'm thinking of is something like the Octagon 2, which was put out by the Golden Guardians team, and they have custom skins for the characters and not custom stages truly, just the stuff like Final Destination. It had Golden Guardians on, or did it say the Octagon? Now I can't even remember. On the
it was one
on
of
the
those.
platform of the stage, and that was really cool. And everybody's going like, "Oh, we should do more of this." But I'm thinking to myself, yeah, but you know what happens if like a big enough event tries to do something like that, right? Like, did we all maybe forget that a little bit? I'm sure for you that just goes through your mind when you get feedback from people who are saying, oh, you can make the event so much cooler if you do this or if you do that. Hey, can we try to do this, whatever it is, that you have to consider those sort of things and try to be like, okay, look, we have to try to straddle this really weird, invincible line, but still try to figure out what it is in order to have an event that goes well. It's very cool, very hype, but also not get shut down.
It is kind of weird, right? It almost feels like events get punished for becoming too big because then they get noticed by Big Brother and, well, rules are laid upon them. So, yeah, I'm sure if Golden Guardians keeps running events and they grow to the size of a Genesis Evo Big House, they will also have constraints to abide by, and they'll deal with it then. But until that point, I think we can enjoy what they're doing. I really enjoy the content that they've been putting out.
If you put it into a weird sentence where it's like, yeah, the Golden State Warriors really like doing melee events in a grassroots sense. Like,
yeah.
Wait, what? What are you trying to say? It's
say
really
what?
cool.
The Golden State, like Steph Curry, or what? Wow, who would have thunk it?
It is really cool, and I hope that continues to happen. But yes, you something that you think of, something that I've thought of, and I can't even begin to understand what kind of stuff you've had to go through for yourself, because you've been able to be in those conversations a little bit more. But like for myself as more of a spectator, I just think like I remember the cease and desist very clearly because it didn't even happen a year ago for the Big House 10 online. But wouldn't it be just so cool if there was a way to continue to forge ahead with saying, here's a legitimate esports organization that wants to get behind Melee, sign not only one, not two, not three, but like, get a whole team of Melee people who understand the community and who can also have like the backing up of a $50,000 like grassroots fund to have all those steps in a really positive direction, and hopefully encourage other organizations to look at Melee and say, hey, we can put our stamp on that. We can do stuff like that. That'd be really cool. There's a real community here that wants to support those kind of enterprises. But then again, like we have been talking about a little bit here, is how Nintendo could just come in at any time and more or less shut it down. Like I don't think it'll ever be something that we're like truly free of until there's somehow a culture change from like the top. But that seems kind of impossible to me.
Yeah. They're like the legal guardian of some kid who they don't see the kid for like 364 days of the year, but that one day they come in and they ruin the birthday party and they say, it's bedtime now.
Or just give like the worst present ever. Like, here you go, you're welcome, and everyone's
That's
going.
so good. Here's a letter from our lawyer. Please shut things down. Yeah, I don't know what's gonna happen, but we still have to contend with it for sure. We have not heard the last from them.
When you think about the entire landscape of the post-pandemic world of Melee, what has stood out to you as either something that was impressive or something that you saw kind of shrink away and sort of disappear that you didn't like seeing from Melee as a whole?
I think the big thing that people are going to be surprised with is just how many casual people still remain. because quarantine has really catered to the diehard competitive tournament goers who just want to grind and get better. And I've always been a big believer in you need to keep every single type of tournament attendee or even just community member in general in mind. And there's going to be the Michael Jordans of the world who try to be the best, but that is a very tiny percentage of the people who actually attend an event, and the rest of them, they might just be there because they want to watch their friend play, or their favorite player is on stage at top 8. So or they want to consume content that is kind of off the wall, like BTS has been doing with the roasts or the skits. So I think that kind of person gets lost in the whole COVID era, because you don't have live events and crowds to be able to meaningfully engage in that way.
That's one of the big questions of Melee for the past 2 months or so. People keep talking about, how do we market Melee to the masses? How do we get to the top of the funnel? And from your own standpoint, and I agree with that, saying that there's a certain amount of people that get lost in the landscape of competitive online Melee sets, that it's less attractive looking to more of a casual individual. There's not really as many things to care about, and I think that comes across in the viewership kind of dipping down a little bit. It also has to do with the fact that it's being played online and it's not in person. There's always that magical thing that comes with that. But what would you say is the big reason behind it?
I can't point to any reason, but what I do know is I think you're a good case study, especially it is good to talk to someone who, as I understand, you haven't attended an in-person event, right?
I have not.
So that is fantastic, because you are an enigma in the best possible way. And I feel like we need to dig into what makes you tick as a content creator, and how we can put the fertile ground in for more people like you to enter the scene, because I believe that has been lacking in the COVID era, where the general routine is, oh, you want to enter this online event? Cool. You don't get any in-person, face-to-face interaction. You just kind of look at pixels on a screen and say GG's.
For me, I was very inspired by what Alston Melee was doing with their content, their podcast, all very cool stuff. And then I found the Wannabes as well at around the time of 5 Days of Melee. 5 Days of Melee, by the way, being one of the more successful streams and projects that Melee has done in the entire pandemic process. And I think a lot of people really enjoyed that. It was really cool from all different kinds of perspectives, but I found the Wannabes podcast as well. So shout outs to JD and Wasabi who co-host that together. They made it really possible in my mind to contribute my own little project, which I didn't necessarily picture as interviewing a bunch of people when I first started podcasting. I thought, I just want to talk about Melee. That'll be really fun. And it is really fun. It's true, but it's also been a privilege to talk to people like you and so on down the line. That's kind of how it started. Just listening to JD and Wasabi talk about playing and being around Melee, and they're not top players. They're good players, and they're mid-level veterans, you could say, but they just made it so much more possible in my mind to get involved and contribute.
I really like the last point you brought up. They're not like top players. This is not. Melee for a long time it has acted like a meritocracy, but that's not, I think, the best community building philosophy here. And just the fact that I'm looking down the list of guests that you've had, and I would say the majority of which I've never heard of. I think that is great. One of my favorite personalities on TV is Conan O'Brien, and looking through what he's done recently is, instead of talking to a celebrity guest, he's literally just taken call-ins from a random person from like Mexico City or Buffalo, New York, or Kiev, and it has been some of his best content ever. So I think we could learn a thing or two from just opening things up to the average community member who is not a top player or commentator, or anybody who's well known at all.
I really love talking to people who are involved with Melee in some capacity, like Petra, who I had on a little while ago, is based in Nova Scotia and just helps out with the events that are run up there, like the online events that are run up there, and has since like started to get a little bit more with running events, and actually contributed to the Free Palestine Net Play tournament, the charity tournament that happened. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. And she did not get involved because of me specifically. Okay, and that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to say, like, it's really cool to meet people along the way of doing this project and going, okay, this is how what your relationship to Melee is. This is why you love the game. This is like how you consume or how you contribute. Oh, this is really cool. And you get to have a really fun conversation. I've really liked to key in on that for myself. And it's fun to talk to people like you. You've had a very your carbon footprint and contribution to the Melee canvas, as I call it, is definitely meaningful and awesome, super cool. But I have really enjoyed, like, I love the fact that you don't know or don't recognize, you know, half or however many of the people that have been on. That's really cool. I think that's what I want to continue to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you. Those are, we're all doing our best out here.
And speaking of, for yourself, what are you up to in regards to Melee? I'm not asking you to break any news or anything like that. No Melee HD announcement, but what are you up to as it comes to Melee and how you see a future tournament happening, like the Big House, the sequel to the botched 10 online?
Oh man, that whole that whole C&D kind of put a sour taste in my mouth. I don't know if I'm gonna tempt fate again with that, but I think the overarching picture is, I think the content that people like BTS is producing and 5 Days of Melee, that kind of stuff is awesome, and I want people to push content like that more, and that's something that I'm going to try to do too whenever the next event or a project that I do is it's no longer just holding a clipboard and running a tournament and seeing who the winner is at the end of the day. There's people who are engaged in much different ways, so I've kind of started doing that with Big House 8 and 9. I think it really helped that we were in the same venue for 3 straight years for the first time. And I didn't have to worry about that part. And instead, I could focus on creating the best experience for whatever variety of attendees was there. But at the same time, we could do so much more with variety pieces that are not Smash related, and just we just want to be on the backs of the personalities that are in our scene, because they are great.
And it's really cool to hear you talk about stuff like that, because I think that's something that GG Melee does, the GG Melee channel that's headed up by Golden Guardians, and you get Toph and PPMD, everybody else on there. Sorry, I should name none. And Zane, excuse me. Wow, I can't believe Zane was the last person I named there, but that's kind of the point, where it's like they're not doing just specifically stream recaps and edited down like cropped streams. Like they're doing like trying to do original pieces. They're trying to continue on the spirit of 5 Days of Melee, where there's like a Melee Jeopardy episode that they did for like the 10,000 subscribers special. So and good. I think people really enjoy watching stuff like that. It doesn't specifically have to be Melee gameplay. And then maybe eventually there's something that's not really Melee related at all, but it's still those 4 people involved and people going, oh wow, that's really cool, and I've never watched Melee before, but maybe I'll watch it now because I really like those personalities. Yeah,
there's gonna be new content creators who spawn from watching what they've produced, and that does warm my heart, honestly. It's kind of like I always think back to Big House 9, the last event I hosted, and I think there's something beautiful about the fact that it ended with Mango vs. Zane, Marth vs. Falco. This is just like the timeless matchup in Melee. It seems like anytime something exciting happens, it's because there's a Marth and Falco in grand finals at some big tournament. Like Ken vs. PC Chris, Meech King vs. Shiz, and now this generation's Mango vs. Zane. And I hope there are other Juggle guys and other ciphers who spawn from this generation of spectators, because like Mango vs. Zane is their version of Ken vs. PC Chris.
And it's a really exciting future for Melee as a whole, despite the fact that we had enough of a conversation tonight to know that it's never going to quite look the same as any other esport that you could look around and go, oh wow, hey look, developer support, who knew, right? Or they're not getting shut down or in danger of getting shut down if they get too big. Like, oh, this is going really well. Can we make it go slightly less well, though? We don't want to get too hype. Like, it must be such a weird line for you as a TO to, and for the other TOs that run national sized events to do. But I really appreciate.
It is weird. It is weird. Remind me to yell at Sheridan. I wanted him to test the waters, to poke at the bear with Genesis Online, but he chickened out. So I currently have no idea what's gonna happen if I announce, hey, the Big House Online, with the second try. Yeah, who knows?
No, I'm hoping at the very least that you're not going to close the door on a return to an IRL Big House, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. The sad part is the venues, they really wanted to know like in February. So it was impossible to say yes to them at that time. So I don't know about anything this year, but definitely setting my sights on a 2022 at the very least.
Oh, sure. That sounds really reasonable to me. Like in February, hardly anybody was starting to receive vaccines. I think it might have even only been available to like the first wave, like healthcare workers and immunocompromised individuals. Yeah. I don't even know if it was available like that at that time, but I mean, how are you supposed to know? How's anybody supposed to know? So that makes total sense to me. And the fact that you're not closing the door on running the Big House in an IRL setting again in the future, the fact that you're not closing that door totally is very cool to me, because I would feel like if I were in your position, I would go, maybe I could try my hand at something that doesn't involve potentially getting shut down just because it's too good for the world.
Oh, that's the thing with all of us. It's it's kind of this weird gatekeeper of Smash TOing is there is no money and there's no developer support. So if you're doing it, that means you probably really love the game and the community. And that is something that still applies to me today.
Super cool to hear. I want to start to get in the direction of wrapping up. One other question that I wanted to ask you about specifically is this position that you took up recently over at Starduck as a project manager. And if you want to talk about that just for a moment, I'm more or less curious of what the heck that is and what you are excited about as you continue to get acclimated to that position.
Yeah, Starduck is a game studio in Michigan, and I'm a project manager over there. I just started a couple months ago, so we're essentially developing a video game, and I'm sitting kind of like at the intersection between the engineers, the networking people, and upper management, and making sure that shit gets done between those people. So it's almost like TOing, but for a product that is more mature in its development life cycle, like a video game that is playable in some form right now. So that is it was a pretty exciting move for me. I would say, trying to summarize the last couple of years, there was a moment probably in like 2019 where I realized I really need my day-to-day job to involve subject matter that I really enjoy. Like I had bounced around in IT and application development at like healthcare company, software company, but I pivoted away from that, and I was at Panda for a while, also doing something similar. And there's the technical aspect, but to be able to do that and also enjoy the field that you're doing the technical stuff in, I think is extremely rewarding. So I've been lucky to be able to find a role that allows me to do that.
Hearing success stories like yours and people like Zev, for example, who are, maybe you weren't thinking to yourself, and when you first started organizing tournaments, this is going to help me get a job that is really rewarding and allows me to use the things that I've learned from running this very small house-sized tournament with like 5 or 10 other people. This is going to get me a really fun job someday. But like that's how it ended up being, and it's really cool to hear stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And so lastly, I just want to make sure that you can tell the people where to find you and offer any other thoughts that you have before we get going.
Yeah, I think we covered pretty much everything. So thanks for having me on. You can find me on Twitter at JuggleRob.
And that's pretty much it, right?
That's pretty much it. I'm not a streamer. I just just do my own thing. Sometimes I hop on Slippy. Sometimes I TO. That's it.
And when the world needs you most for all kinds of 5 days of Melee content, hopefully sometime this upcoming early winter, maybe we'll get to see a return of Juggle Rob. Sorry, I mixed it up again. This happens to you, I'm sure, but Juggle Guy hopping back onto some Melee content.
Oh, I would love to. I think. I don't know about you, but like some people have been bored during the pandemic. Some people have tried to be more creative. I am starting to feel the creative itch, and I want to put that energy somewhere if there's not a big house in late 2021.
So one more time, Robin, thank you so much for joining me on Bottom of the Smash Mountain.
Thanks, Jesse.
We made it. Thank you so much for sticking around for the entire interview of Juggle Guy, and now it's just me talking. Hey, where are you going? Just kidding. I'm very thankful to, like I said at the top, to have the opportunity to talk to anybody about Melee. And I do recognize the fact that talking to Juggle Guy about the Big House 10 online cease and desist stuff was definitely a unique opportunity, one that doesn't come by every day, because this is literally the person who was directly in the middle of that situation. And yeah, I could like ask lots and lots and lots of questions, and I had to fight the urge to do that, but it was great to talk about a variety of different things. And I think you got a snapshot of why Robin is so successful at the organizing aspect of running a tournament, because he is able to say to people who can do things, this is where I want you to go, and this is how you can succeed, and then that's what ends up happening. Very underrated aspect of tournament organizing. I think that some people might start it for the reason of saying, I want to have an excuse to play against the top players in my area, or I want to do it because it's a lucrative thing. And then they'll eventually find out that it's not necessarily the world's best paying job, or not even close. But I think what was clear to me was how enthusiastic Robin is about the community itself, and how running a tournament is not just about seeing the hype topic gameplay, but also making the experience great for everyone that's in the venue. So that was really cool to hear directly from him about stories were related around the Big House as a whole, and then hearing specific stories about cease and desist stuff, or hearing about how it first came to be, all that kind of stuff. It was great. So thank you again to Robin, to Juggle Guy, for joining me. Now, before we get going here, there's a piece of news that I felt that is worth sharing. And again, I'm not trying to like lean heavy on saying yeah or no, because the truth of the matter is that this is all very complicated still. But the Big House, I am just stuck in the Big House mode. Let me reset. Beyond the Smash Summit 11, that group, you get it, released a statement today that more or less said hacks will not be welcome to the Big House 11 in any context, not as a player, not as a spectator, not as a VIP pass, not as a person who's on staff, like, I don't know, running the stream. Not welcome as a consultant. Okay, look, I'm butchering this statement. I could read it word for word. You know what? Maybe I'll just do that. Let me do that. And while I pull it up on Twitter here, I can also talk about how there is going to be an event that I have set my eye on here, an IRL event that is very small, local, so very small, you get it, event that I think I will be able to go to. I'm sharing this news with y'all because it's very exciting, and this is something that Juggle Guy and I talked about a little bit as well, just about how IRL stuff is obviously going to be very different from online setting in terms of a tournament. So I haven't been able to even compete online because I don't have access to the internet. I don't have access to Wi-Fi within my home. But the first ever tournament that I'm going to enter actually is going to be in IRL, and I think that it's going to be happening. I'm like 99%. Gosh, I'm 99% sure that it's going to happen as of now, but until it's more official, like, we'll just keep it at that, and I won't share any more details with you. But you best believe that I will be trying to have it involved in the podcast in some way, shape, or form. So you'll know when you know. You know? Beyond the smash. Okay, let's see the statement. This is directly from at BTS. At BT. Oh, there's two S's. BTS SMASH. BTS Smash. At BTS Smash on Twitter. This is the statement as follows. Many people have expressed concerns about the content of Hax's video to us. We take the safety of our Smash Summit 11 players and attendees very seriously and do not condone behavior that encourages harassment or threats towards any of our players or staff. After reviewing the video and concerns from multiple attendees, we will be prohibiting Hax from attending the event in any capacity. So obviously, okay, I'm done talking, by the way. So obviously, the statement did not include all the things that I said. He's not going to be there as a sales consultant. I'm making light of the situation. That is a personality trait of mine that I'm not always 100% proud of. I'll share a story as an aside. We've already done one aside about the hack situation, but we are going to do one more aside. So bear with me. But I have two children. My wife and I are very happy to have our two children. That's not why I'm bringing them up. I'm bringing them up because when my wife was in labor with our second child, Ezra, she was in labor and she had not done that for our first child because our first child was born via emergency C-section. So this was her first time in labor and going through labor pains, literal labor pains. And for those of you who don't know, that is quite painful, not because I know firsthand, but just because I was in the room with her the entire time as she was going through labor with our son, Ezra. And several times I tried to make light of everything and to give a joke here, give a joke there, and they did not land. But I still did it anyway, like an idiot, because that's part of my personality. Like if something serious is happening, I will respect that and I will acknowledge that, but I will also simultaneously try to make a joke out of it. In fact, I think I was even trying to do that while Robin and I were talking about the cease and desist. I think I was occasionally trying to end a sentence with a haha. And we're talking about cease and desist from Nintendo. The ninjas could have been listening to this very podcast and been like, how dare they talk about this stuff? We are coming after this Cypher and Juggleguy guys. We're coming after them. I don't know that. Hopefully not. Nintendo, please. Okay, back to hacks. Back to Leffen. Obviously, evidence.zip2 dropped this past weekend, and I talked about it on my episode with Killa OR. Not in our conversation with Killa OR. I mean, after that interview was done, I provided my own opinion on it, which was more or less, hey, look, I don't really have that much of an opinion on it because I don't know anybody involved. I don't know any of them personally. So, sorry that I'm not going to immediately launch into a very politically charged, heavy tirade level of, hey, we should do this, or hey, this is a valid point here, or that, the dark tetrad or triad or whatever. There are all kinds of different things that people can say, and you can pick sides, you can do all that. My personal thing about it is that I don't know either of them, and I don't know any of the other people mentioned, either by name or being implied or inferred. I don't know any of the circumstances that were mentioned, like past history and recounts of different situations. So when I see an announcement from BTS Smash where they say Hax is not going to be welcome to Summit 11, he will be prohibited, I should say, from Summit 11, banned, what that signals to me is that people who are in the know are going to say, hey, look, hacks is not welcome because of the harassment angle. That's what the statement was saying, more or less. Not because we hate hacks as an individual and never want to see him again. It's just more of like, the video very clearly is encouraging harassment at the very least in Leffen's direction. That's even if it's like, even if the video was or is halfway true, depending on what your opinion of the video is, even if it's halfway true, it's still not an accurate picture. It's not 100% precise, accurate picture of who Leffen is, right? And if you're treating the video as like true evidence that could like appear in a court of law, there's a reason why it's not in a court of law. This is a court of public opinion, and people are going to do what they do best with court of public opinion stuff. And some people will make memes, some people will make serious videos, some people will tweet serious threads and do all that kind of stuff. I just don't like that the situation is happening in the first place. How about that? There's a strong stance that I'll take. I don't like that any of this is happening in the first place. I'm trying to do what I can do, which is to emulate a safe, welcoming community for Melee and to push the positivity stuff. I'm not going to shy away from a negative thing if that's what happens to be the subject going around, in the sense of refusing to talk about it on my podcast or refusing to tweet about it. I will try to contribute my sentences or my thoughts in podcast form, but it's going to ultimately add up to something that you said you would say to me, Jesse, that's cool, but that doesn't really matter to me. So you're welcome. I agree. What I have to say does not really matter. And that's where we're going to leave it. So I've read the statement and I've talked about that, how hacks is not going to be at Summit 11, and it is what it is. I like Leffen and I like hacks. It's a shame that it's just that all of this is happening. But here we are. So Summit 11 is going to continue to move on and hopefully be in person. We have all kind of theory crafted about this, and hopefully that will turn out to be the case. And other than that, we look forward to other events happening. I believe that GOML Online is going to be happening sometime in the near future. If it's not this weekend, I feel like it's a weekend coming up very soon where there's going to be all kinds of different brackets, not only in North America, but also in Europe. They're having Europe brackets for Get On My Level Online, which is really cool. Let's see when exactly this is happening. If you go to @GOML's plan, and obviously for Twitter handles, there's no apostrophe, so GOMLSPLAN on Twitter is going to be, yes, Melee is going to be on June 19th through the 20th, which is indeed 2 weekends from now. It is not on June 12th and 13th, this upcoming weekend. It is June 19th and 20th next weekend after that. So let's just say 2 Saturdays from now. How about that? And for those of you who are listening to this a year from now, what are things like? And has Juggleguy announced the Big House 2022? Well, is he going to call it the Big House 10, or is he going to call it the Big House 11, or is he going to call it the Big House 12? Because it would be really cool if the year continues to match up with the number. These are things to think about. And if anybody is saying, by the way, in the present or in the future, regardless, if anybody is saying that you can't call it the Big House 12 because there was no Big House 11, what do you have to say about the iPhone? It went from iPhone to iPhone 3G to iPhone 4, 4S, 4C, 4i, PLNMOQRSTUV. iPhone names are so confusing, dude and dudette. And it's ridiculous how confusing names for the iPhone are. And you would think that they would just come out with iPhone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But no, we have to be hipster about it. So if you didn't already infer from this entire sidebar, I'm saying that the Big House 12 is what it should be named if we're going to have it in 2022, as compared to miraculously making something happen in the end of 2021. All right, that's all I have to say. I'm getting too far off base here. We're really excited for GOML Online, and then we're excited for Summit 11. We're excited for the big one. That is referring to Rollback Rumbles, the big one. Let's go. We got all kinds of events happening in the early summer block here, and excited to not get on my level. I already mentioned that. Gallant Melee Open Summer Edition, also very exciting. And by the way, Deer is pretty much involved with all these events in some level capacity or other, or at least it feels like it. So congratulations to Deer. Shout outs to Deer. Okay, now I'm done. I promise. I've been talking for 15 minutes already. But gosh, let's get out of here. We'll catch you next time.